I don't think it would be dramatic of me today to say that the update for Season 1 Reloaded for Warzone is the worst we've ever seen. The update itself on paper looked fairly decent. There was a really good balancing pass to LMGs, a slight nerf to one-shot sniper rifles, and the medium to long-range meta was looking quite good. The downsides were that the MTZ Interceptor were not going to be nerfed this update, neither was the WSP Swarm, and those were coming in later updates. On top of that, the exfil has been completely wiped, but also weapons cases aren't in the game in this update. And then to add even more to the things that were missing, the actual ability to steal nuke contracts is not in Season 1 Reloaded. So we've had a plethora of things that have been delayed, and an update that on paper looked okay. There were some audio fixes, some map pass fixes, and things that generally looked quite positive, with the only major downsides being the fact that there was less content, and generally speaking, the lack of a WSP Swarm and Interceptor nerf looked pretty bad. But then the update came out, and honestly, it's been pretty horrific. To start with, most people can't actually get into the game. There is a fetching profile death loop that stops people getting into Warzone and doesn't allow them in the game, and if you do get in by dragging into a friend's party and playing quads, your game will brick itself if you use a loadout drop, and everything just doesn't work. Loadout drops don't work. If you take a loadout drop and you don't have the bug, you don't get your perks. And to prove to you guys that I'm not being dramatic, these are all of the bugs that I found in a 3-hour period. Other than the fact that there's no nerf to the Interceptor or Swarm, and the fact that covert exfil and weapons cases are gone, the Champion's Quest has been disabled because of a bug, airstrike and mortar notifications do not appear in the game, servers have been experiencing an extreme amount of lag, progression for all of the new guns and all of the new attachments appears to not work at the moment, the group skin is now back into the game and doesn't appear to have had any substantial changes, ranked play for multiplayer has been delayed whilst they look into a major bug, and to specify, there is currently no timetable for when either the Champion's Quest or ranked play will be returning, despite them being the two major points of this update. The events page that's also in the game appears to be not working for the vast majority of people. So overall, this update's been a disaster. Most of the game doesn't actually work, most of the new content for this update has been rescinded, it's been a full progression backwards. The balancing for the game also has made pretty much no sense. Whilst the balancing pass that they added to the game made perfect sense in terms of balancing the mid-range, changing a couple things here and there, not including the MTZ Interceptor or the WSP Swarm in this equation meant that the MTZ Interceptor has been inadvertently buffed because every other gun is now worse, and the WSP Swarm, or the update that they're planning to do to nerf it, only mentions the medium to long range damage of the Swarm, not the fact that it has a 100 round magazine, not the fact that it has super tight hipfire, not the fact that the thing is just an all-round laser beam that beats absolutely everything. Now, it isn't all doom and gloom. There are a few silver linings to this update. To start with, frame rates across the board for people on PC and console appear to be higher and more consistent. Brightness inside and outside of buildings seems to have been amped up in a really positive way that not only makes the game look more colorful without any kind of filters, but also makes people more visible in the game. They've changed some of the UI elements, the buy station looks a lot cleaner, when you're being hunted with a contract and somebody's chasing you down, there's more of an alert system in place for that, and generally speaking, the audio improvements, although I've only had some limited time with them, do seem to generally improve the soundstage of Warzone. I can't say for certain that it's going to be a universal improvement to the audio in Warzone, but so far it seems like somewhat of an upgrade. And when we did actually manage to get into a game where the servers weren't completely collapsing and the frame rate was working accordingly and everything was going somewhat fine, the game actually felt super smooth, super responsive, and some of these were nice positive changes, especially things like vaulting and certain zip lines being disabled to stop people glitching. I will say though, they can't redeem the fact that most of the update content from this update is straight up missing, and a good percentage of people can't even play the game, or they can't take their loadout drops without the game crashing. 4 things have been added to the Warzone Trello update board as of so far. 2 major pieces of content, the Champion's Quest and Ranked Play, are completely gone, and honestly, most people just straight up can't get into the game. There have been very few times in Warzone's history where I think an update has been worthy of them absolutely rolling back an update, but this might be it. This might be one of the first times I can confidently say rolling back this update would be more beneficial to Warzone than keeping this update rolled out. Now, this entire situation speaks to a much larger issue in Warzone, and there's a couple of things I want to talk about before I wrap up this video. The first thing is that these integrations and Warzone itself needs to stop doing major events in December. The game is always at its weakest around this time of year because they push major content updates like the release of Warzone Live, and then all of the developers go on holiday for Christmas. Now, naturally, nobody is saying that any devs should be working crunch, nobody is saying that holiday shouldn't happen, and nobody's saying that developers should be working overtime during the Christmas period. That being said, it's on Activision and on Raven Software's teams to recognize that when you're running this large live service, releasing a major piece of content in December and then trying to put together these updates in quick succession off the back of that holiday always ends up being a massive, massive failure. It's the weakest time of the year for Warzone. It's when the metas are the most stalest, the cheaters are the highest, and the game tends to work at the least functional. And honestly, this entire update on paper sounded fantastic, but what's really been disappointing to me is the balancing element. Now, with the nerfs to the LMGs and the minor nerf to the sniper rifles, this is a really decent balance for medium to long range. But not touching the WSP Swarm and not touching the Interceptor, in my opinion, is just as bad as having a critical bug in the game. This means we're now going to the 4th update for the game in order for the MTZ Interceptor to actually be nerfed to where it needs to be. And the WSP Swarm is so inherently powerful that there are basically no other options. But what's even more confusing is putting this balancing update live, knowing that you've nerfed all of the viable alternatives to challenge the Interceptor, and leaving the Interceptor as is just means that you've skewed the meta even more so, because any person who is logical is going to use the Interceptor knowing that every other gun is now worse. So putting this update live, in my opinion, without having full balancing passes to me made no sense in the first place. But putting it live when you have the vast majority of the content missing from the game makes even less sense to me. I'd rather have waited a few more days, or hell, even another week for everything to be validated and all of the balancing to be done correctly, so long as everything released properly. But instead, we're here sat with possibly one of the worst updates the game's ever seen, and a vast majority of the player base who can't even get into the game. They are stuck in a profile loading screen loop, and when they get in the game and use their loadout, they either don't get their perks or their game crashes again. And to make things even funnier, and this is the icing on the cake for me, after loading into my 4th or 5th game into Warzone, I was killed by somebody who seemed a little too confident in smoke grenades. I reported him, and he got kicked by Ricochet. So Ricochet's working at least, but there are still a fairly large percentile of cheaters in the game at this point in time, on top of this update being an absolute disaster. I'm really interested to see your thoughts and feelings below. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. As always, folks, thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.